Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. And in this one, I'm going to be covering how I strategize against Warlocks and Shadow Priests, as these are two specializations that are currently on the rise in patch 9.0.5. And if you want to start having success in the latter, it's very important that you understand how they work and the best ways to combat them. Now, in this video, I will be playing a Balanced Druid and coming from the Balanced Druid perspective. However, a lot of this intel and strategy is also applicable to a wide variety of specializations and compositions. So against this particular class, the Shadow Priest or the Affliction Warlock, you want to load up a ton of burst damage. So as a Balanced Druid, you're going to do that by building up your astral power and not just willy-nilly spending your star surges. And you can see that on the bar here. I'm building up this blue bar to generate star surges, and I'll just bank that up over time until I've maxed it out. And then what I want to do is I want to coordinate with my partner. Then we're going to do burst damage and try and interrupt the caster. So here I've used Solar Beam on the Shadow Priest, and I've popped all of my aggressive cooldowns. As soon as the Shadow Priest is retreated out of my line of sight, I will immediately switch to another target. But generally speaking, it's a good idea to line up your burst damage with an interrupt. And the main reason for this is that if you interrupt Vampiric Touch, Mind Games, basically anything the Shadow Priest casts, you prevent them from using their defensive cooldowns to survive. And they have a lot of them. So if you're not coordinating that, you're unlikely to be able to net a kill. So generally saving your interrupts and lining them up with your burst damage. In this position, you want to be running away from Dark Soul, this purple icon right here, or Power Infusion, a yellow icon you'll see on the Priest. When those are active on a Shadow Priest or a Warlock, that is when you are most likely to die against these specializations. So you want to learn to recognize these icons as quickly as possible. And you can see that here on my Omnibar, the Dark Soul. Now that it's over, we want to focus on keeping our dots up, Sunfire, Moonfire on as many targets, still just generating this astral power, but we go for a stun, and I go for my Incarnation and Convoke. Now in this position, for some reason, Aura Mastery wasn't applied to me when I started this, and I've noticed this a couple times, but you do want to call for Aura Mastery if you're running Night Fae balance. And during this time, after you've used Convoke and your Mastery is buffed up from the Nia Soulbind, you do want to just dump out your Star Surges as much as possible before you lose that extra Mastery on that damage. But then as soon as it's over, you want to retreat. So my healer's in crowd control. My partner and I are both very low health. It's time to run away. Void Form here on Gladius, a very scary cooldown from the Shadow Priest. You want to interrupt the Shadow Priest, stun the Shadow Priest, cycle in the Shadow Priest, do whatever it takes really to prevent the Shadow Priest from attacking whenever you see that purple icon active on the class. Void Torrent is also very scary. In this position, I ended up tanking it, which was a pretty risky gamble to do, but I'm more afraid of Mind Games as a Balanced Druid. But as another class, you may want to disrupt Void Torrent as much as possible. I could have used Disorienting Roar in this position. When you're fighting Double Spellcaster, it's generally going to be a very long game, and you should just anticipate this. And the most important kind of mental fortitude that you need for this is to just expect it to be long. Try to keep to the basics that I'm describing in this video, but if the targets aren't dying before dampening, it's not the end of the world. You're not making a mistake. It's just the way that the game is currently. So you just want to keep fishing for those opportunities as much as you can. And if you are playing those strategies effectively in dampening, I can guarantee that you will start to have success. When you're fighting against a Warlock, particularly Affliction, if you have the ability to remove curses, this is very important. You want to remove Agony, and you want to remove Curse of Tongues. Here in this position, you can see Dark Soul, the purple icon, active once again. So I want to remove the curse as much as possible. I want to use Regrowth as much as possible, and ultimately use Cyclone too if I need to, if the enemy targets are pushing on top of us in this position. You just want to push the enemies away. Here I land an interrupt on the Warlock. It was more or less defensive, but I trigger my Eclipse right when I land that interrupt to try and burst down the Warlock. Fortunately, the interrupt ended up fading, and the Warlock was able to run away, so I just immediately switch. I want to make sure that I get those Star Surges out as quickly as possible when I trigger Eclipse on a Balanced Druid, so that my Balance of all things legendary will benefit me from its crit enhancement. And then at this point, we're just attacking whoever's in the open. Cycloning Dispersion is a good idea against the Shadow Priest. That's their defensive cooldown. And the main reason cycloning it is great is because Cyclone prevents healing. You can do this with Detainment in Prison on a Demon Hunter as well, and prevent the Shadow Priest from recovering during that defensive cooldown. Against this composition, when you don't have your burst window, you want to just push them back, try and punish them for overextending. Here I'm cycloning the druid, and I see power infusion on the shadow priest. This is that yellow icon, very scary. I see void eruption, very scary. This is the shadow priest ramping up for a lot of damage, and that's going to be represented in the health bars in just a moment. I am trying to counter attack at the same time, but this could be risky. Here I utilize Typhoon to interrupt void torrent, so you do want to try and stop that whenever you can. I use solar beam to stop mass dispel, as mass dispel removes my cyclone on the druid. It ultimately is not of too much consequence, again, because this is a very tanky composition. It's incredibly durable, at least to our type of damage. There are other classes in the game, subtlety rogues, windwalkers, that can kind of penetrate through this self-sustainability that a shadow priest and a warlock bring. But if you're noticing that the warlocks and the shadow priests are just not taking damage, it's likely that your class doesn't have a mortal wounds effect. It doesn't have the kit to really get through the defense that's offered to those specializations, and balance particularly is very weak to that. So that's why I say this strategy that I'm implementing is important to implement, and don't expect to get early wins against these classes, and also don't get frustrated when the game isn't going your way, even though you feel like you're setting up those burst windows perfectly. But now dampening has started, so it's time to get a bit more aggressive. Here we're now utilizing our Hammer of Justice on the healer. We're trying to cyclone the healer a little bit more, but also Dark Soul has active from their Warlock, the purple icon. And you can see on the health, as soon as that purple icon goes up, our health bars start to spike going down. You want to try and purge Dark Soul if you can. It can be difficult with them Warlocks playing with Resto Druids now. It's not always reliable. So using personal defensive cooldowns like Barkskin or whatever you have available to your class is going to be important. Interrupting Malefic Rapture, interrupting Void Torrent, and Mind Games. These are the critical high impact spells. I would much worry less about Vampiric Touch in this particular matchup, and with the current state of Shadow Priest, I'd be more afraid of Void Torrent and Mind Games. But here we can see Void Form active, that purple icon on the Shadow Priest. So I'm going to bash the Shadow Priest, I'm going to cycle on the Shadow Priest and try and remove them from the game. Still utilizing Decurse throughout, maintaining my damage over time effects, trying to fish the Decurse when I don't have anything else to do. And I'm just healing up because we're so low on health and we haven't made it deep enough into dampening. I have noticed against competent Shadow Priest teams that as a balance rate, it takes excessive dampening. But here's an opportunity. I tell my Paladin top op Aura Mastery, I go for Incarnation Convoke, as the Warlock and the Shadow Priest were both in my line of sight. And I noticed that Psychic Horror was on cooldown, Silence was on cooldown. There's no way to really stop me. So I got a ton of damage out with that. We forced very important cooldowns, being the Unending Resolve. This is the red icon here. That is the main defensive for the Affliction Warlock. As soon as that's out of the way, you do likely want to prioritize them if you can. Now, they can make it difficult to hit them by using Portal and Line of Sighting, but ultimately when you've gotten through that cooldown, this is substantially longer than Dispersion or Fade for the Shadow Priest. But if you interrupt the Shadow Priest, you can still commit to them. So here, I proc my Eclipse. I try to go for burst damage on the Shadow Priest, but I wasn't able to interrupt them, so they trade Greater Fade. They immune a lot of the damage. And because Dispersion is still on cooldown, going after the Shadow Priest is not a bad idea. They're the only ones right in front of us, and we're still stunning the Druid a little bit more. This is also because the other team is getting more aggressive. I think that if they're not aggressive, our team will actually be able to burst them down easier than they will into dampening. So they're trying to be the aggressors and prevent us from getting to that overload dampening point where Nature Swiftness Recovery is no longer going to be relevant for the Restoration Druid. But your team is likely to have mana problems if you bring a Paladin compared to a Druid or Shaman. So you want to just be helping the Paladin out as much as possible with regrowth again, using Stampeding Roar to cross and get away from them when they dogpile on top of your team is generally a good idea as well. Bashing them up while they're midfield, trying to get your Paladin to a safe place in the map so they're not attacked and maybe they can drink as well. Whenever you're stunned, use Barkskin, trade a defensive cooldown, and then try and build up your astral power like I said. So here I've built up quite a lot of astral power, but my Paladin is very low, so I'm trying to move over to remove their Curse of Agony. I'm trying to assist here with Cyclones. I'm going to Bear Form to use Frenzied Regeneration, and when I do that, I tell my healer, don't heal me. If you're using a personal defensive cooldown or you're going to heal yourself a lot, let your healer know, don't heal me, I don't need heals, heal somebody else, because this is where it becomes very stressful for your healer, and you want to tell them that I'm taking less damage, I'm healing myself, or I'm healing this target, heal that target, so that you can allocate your heals efficiently, because you're going to be working with minimal mana, you're going to be working at high levels of intensity. And then at this point, I try to cycle in the Druid. I'm still trying to find those opportunities to turn the game around. When I use Innervate, I want to try and clone whatever can remove the innervate. In this case, it's the Shadow Priest. They can purge it. So I cycle in the Shadow Priest when I innervate my Paladin to try and give us a last moment recovery. And you can already see how difficult this game is. My entire team is below 50% health. Their team is at full mana. Their team is just basically laughing at us. And again, our only way to win, you think just stop the drinks and stuff like that. It doesn't matter how much overall damage you do. It's all about lining your damage up during an interrupt to prevent defensive cooldowns at a high level of dampening so that their healer can't recover them. This is really the only reliable way of beating this composition. So here I've tried to interrupt the Shadow Priest, but they ultimately ended up faking me out. I had thought that I landed the interrupt, so I popped Incarn Convoke, and look at that. They just Greater Fade, and they run behind the pillar. Now, when you have your most powerful cooldowns, like Incarnation, if the enemies run away, your healer needs to go back and drink. Because if they try to push into you, you have a higher chance of killing them. And then if they don't push in, your healer can drink and regenerate mana. So we take that gamble. Our Paladin ends up getting a bit of mana. Then we need to use our heals. We need to use defensive cooldowns. This is where I say I'm Frenzy Regen. Heal the Shaman, right? Because if we didn't say heal the Shaman here, the Shaman was going to die if the Paladin was targeting us. So this is where the communication of telling your partners what you're doing is important. Now we get the Druid stunned up. I see Mind Control being casted. I want to stop that. I can use Cyclone to stop that at this current time. Otherwise, Typhoon or Discerning Roar. But we also bait the Shadow Priest to use a trinket. So I try to punish that by bashing the Shadow Priest and calling, let's go for the Shadow Priest. We burst down the Shadow Priest in a stun and kill them with an Earth Shock. Now, this is still somewhat of a fluke because they actually had defensive cooldowns in their bar. But this is ultimately your only way to be able to find victory. I've found as a balance druid, if you're not playing with a Windwalker, a Demon Hunter, these high burst, high mobility melee, a Subtlety Rogue, these classes are very hard to kill. And this strategy implementation that I'm describing to you is the only way that I've been able to really even find victory against these classes and these types of compositions. And they're becoming a lot more prevalent. And I mean, you can see it on the scoreboard, double our damage. Generally speaking, it's very difficult. Maximizing your overall damage is not going to be very relevant, which is the main takeaway for this and the strategies from this. It's build up a lot of bursts, save your damage, land an interrupt, dump all that damage, try and kill the target. Doesn't work, get out of there, heal, tell your healer who you're healing, and then repeat. And just do this over and over and over until either the enemy makes a mistake or dampening gets too high to where they can't recover. And if you're able to do that, you're going to start to see a lot more success. That's something that I'm trying to work on as well. And that's kind of the purpose of these videos as an educational resource to share with you what I'm learning and what I'm experiencing so that you can then have success at whatever it is that your goals are currently for Arena. So I hope that this video was helpful to you. If you liked the video, please leave it with a thumbs up. Comment down below with future video ideas, what you would like to see personally. Again, I just want this to be a good resource for everybody watching. So if there's something I've missed out on or something you'd like to see that isn't here, just let me know and I'll generally get it up there. You can follow me on twitch.tv/Supatease if you want to watch my gameplay live or ask me questions or just be entertained or maybe just laugh at my cringe, whatever the case may be. You can follow me there on twitch.tv. Other than that, thank you very much for watching the video and I will see you in the next one.